Gary, jumping right in, you've mentioned in other interviews that early on you had an interest on the business side of running law firms, especially in intake processes. Eventually, you're given the chance and become manager of an intake department. Tell us about that opportunity. What did it teach you and what did you learn?
Well, Chris, I remember it really well. I'll take you back right before I got the opportunity. I began my legal career in the personal injury side of things at Parker Wakeman, and within a couple of weeks of starting, I noticed, and it kind of hit me right in the face that there was this whole business side of the industry that I never really put any thought into. No one ever shared that with me. And I remember sitting down with my boss at the time, Jerry Parker, and saying, and I wrote down, I still have the script. I drafted this whole one page. This is what I'm going to say. It's going to come across clearly and confidently, and I'm going to get what I want. To be wonderful. And I sat down, I said, Jerry, I said, if there's ever an opportunity where I can get involved in the business side of things, I would love to do that for you. I think I do really well. And he kind of gave me one of these looks, and I went down this whole list that I drafted, and he came up with one of these statements of, that was nice. Thanks so much for sharing. Now, please go back to your office and do what I'm telling you to do. Now, whether it's luck, skill, or circumstance, about a year later, I was promoted to the managing attorney of the intake department. It was new for me. I was excited because I realized that I can make change very quickly, that I can see the results of my work very quickly. And that's really important because, especially as an attorney, doing personal injury cases, even mass tort cases, sometimes it can take months or years before you can see the benefits of your work. And I'm the type of person that really wants to see results quickly, whether you call that impatience or aggressiveness, I don't know. But in this position, I was able to make changes on a daily basis and help others make changes on a daily basis, whereby we can effectuate positive results very quickly. So I loved every second. I jumped right in. I learned a lot, and it springboarded me to other similar ventures.
Yeah, absolutely. And I got a couple questions, on a follow up on that. So when you took on this position, was it already the faucet was on and they're receiving a good steady amount of intakes, or was it kind of like this slow progression where it increased? Were they kind of throwing you to the fire and saying, here you go, you've got a lot of data, optimize? What was it like at the beginning?
You know, to even imply that things were not going well would be just completely false. They were crushing. This is a firm that was already doing great. Jerry Parker was already ahead of the curve. The firm was ahead of the curve with respect to marketing and intake. So when I landed the position, it wasn't as if I landed the position and said, okay, I have all these great ideas. Let's fix it. I didn't know it was broken. I was just more interested in being a part of whatever the program was. Now, as I sat in that position and as I learned, I started second guessing things. I started playing with things. I started sharing my ideas. And to Jerry's credit, he gave me the leash to mess with the status quo. And it wasn't just about the intake process or the people. It was also about how do we get more cases into the firm that are not the traditional sense of spend more money, generate leads. Maybe we can get more referrals. So I really put that on my shoulders and increase the referral aspect. Maybe it was the other way around. Maybe it was, hey, we get all these leads. We either accept them or reject them. What if we find other homes for them that we would normally throw out? So we started referring out more cases, not just bringing in more referrals. It was so I guess the answer is I learned as I went, and I had the ability to make those changes, and the results spoke for themselves. The numbers were great, but it took a lot of hard work. It was team effort. I could not have done it. I did not do it by myself. I needed a team that I could trust, that I could train, that I could learn from, because they were doing it before I was, and figure out how to put them in the best position. That's the goal in any team, right? How to put each other, especially when you're the boss, or if you're a manager, how to put others in the best position to flourish. And that was fun for me.
Yeah, that's incredible. And I really like what you had to say about, developing the referral network and your partners, because the best way to build a relationship is to send a lead. You can be buddy buddy and, maybe co-market and things like that. But if you actually start sending leads, they're more likely to reciprocate.
That's exactly right. Now, I'll tell you what, for those of you law firms who are just starting out or are looking to get referrals from other law firms, take on the garbage, guys. Accept the garbage, right? I remember one specific example where we started sending, I don't remember the case type, let's call it employment law cases to one law firm. And we were getting a lot of those leads and we weren't handling employment law cases internally. And I found a law firm that I would send cases to. And after a few months, they reached out to me and they said, stop sending me this garbage. I only signed like 5 cases within the last 6 months. I don't want you giving me, every 30 cases you give me, they all stink. So I said, no worries. We'll find another law firm. And I found another law firm and they were like, hey, send all the garbage you want. I don't mind sifting through the garbage here. If it takes me 50 cases to get to one, I'll do that because there's an ROI and there's an opportunity cost that you have to consider. And let's not be greedy in this industry. If you're able to look through leads at no cost up front, you do that, right? You consider that. You never know if there's a valuable lead and you can create certainly a give and take with another law firm and a mutually beneficial relationship that can be long-term.
Absolutely. I couldn't agree. And I think that's amazing advice for attorneys listening on how to get their foot in the door with relationships with some of these big firms too.
Yep.
So from this experience, you go on to start your own firm. And then the next year you partner with some of the people behind Captora to start intake conversion experts. How did this teaming up between you, Chris, Matt, and Denny, the Captora team happen?
So I had it's interesting. It wasn't planned that way. I went out on my own and I started consulting law firms on intake. And I'll tell you about that in a little bit. And I had spoken with somebody who had a good reputation within the industry at the time. He knew that I was jumping ship and starting my own consulting practice, which, by the way, one of the scariest things I ever did. And I think any entrepreneur out there, anybody that has taken that leap of faith on themselves knows that scary moment or months or years where they go, wow, did I do the right thing here? It's not really working the way I was hoping it would work. And I was in that stage. And I had met this individual who said, you got to meet, the way you speak about intake, how passionate you are, how experienced you are, you should really meet this guy, Chris O'Brien, who has his own intake software. And at first I was like, yeah, sure, why not? Love introductions, not really sure anything was going to come of it. Met with him at a conference in Las Vegas. And I remember sitting outside at one of those tables outside of the conference room. And we must have spent 3 hours just talking shop, intake stuff, the challenges law firms are having, what he's doing to resolve those issues, what I'm trying to do to resolve the issues from a consulting standpoint. One thing led to another. And we said, what could we do together? And the first thing we did, believe it or not, wasn't create the call center. It was actually put on an intake conference. We both thought, hey, if we put on this intake conference and we bring in law firms from throughout the country, and I try to teach them about intake processes and maybe get some consulting clients out of it, and you teach them about the technology of intake, and maybe you get some clients for Captora, this could be a win-win. And hey, maybe we'll make some money with the conference as well. Now, we really just pieced it together, one item at a time, didn't hire anybody to do this. We did it ourselves, his team and my team. We ended up getting 20 law firms representing 19 states at the conference in New York City. And I thought, a tremendous success. So did he. I remember driving him to the airport and saying, all right, this isn't the end of it. What else can we do here? And then the call center idea came up, and the call center turned into this outsourced intake center, which has been a huge value-added proposition for those law firms that want to get involved in a higher volume cases, but maybe didn't have the resources internally to maximize the return on those marketing investments.
Yeah, so let's talk about that. When you're making these improvements, you're making you're seeing these opportunities. You're hearing from the attorneys at the conference, which I think is super smart. You get to hear their pains and get to figure out, how they're approaching solving the issues. So was it simply getting that information and testing it through the intake conversion experts, and then kind of applying, seeing what what worked best? What was kind of that iteration process?
I think it was a combination of so many things, Chris. For example, when I was at the firm life, when I was in the firm life, and I was discussing with other lawyers how they handled their intake, or how we were getting referrals, or how they were getting referrals, it dawned on me that the process was so broken up and was so not prioritized that it certainly had an impact on the results. And I remember, I'll give you a few examples. I remember creating a process internally that if we tried out the first transfer that, let's get them on. That's not, if we have that claimant on the telephone, we do not have the luxury to say, hey, we can help you, but somebody else can. So I'm going to send your information to another law firm and hopefully they reach out. The moment you hang up with them, they may go find another law firm. So you didn't have that luxury. So the gold standard was, hey, we don't think we can help you, but there's a law firm we're very close with. I'd love to get them on the phone right now and have you speak with them to see if they can help you. And you won't transfer that call. That would be great. There's no break. There's no opportunity for them to find somebody else. And I realized no one was doing that. Then let's say gold standard wasn't available. Then I realized that law firms would send cases to each other and then have no follow-up on those referrals. So for instance, I once worked with a law firm, a top marketer in its state, and they were signing 400 cases a month for their law firm. And when they brought me in to consult, we realized that they had referred out over 1,000 cases to another law firm in the past year. When we talked about the status of those cases, they said, oh, well, we get a check. We get a check every once in a while, so we know things are going well. I said, okay, that's good. But what about, do you know which cases you're getting a check from? And does your system dictate for you what the status of each case that you sent to them is? Did they accept it? Did they reject it? Are they trying to sign it? Did it resolve? What status is it in? And they didn't. But they weren't the only ones. Most law firms figure, hey, referrals like a winning lottery ticket. And if it ends up, being a few dollars, that's great. But we can't do that because we paid for those leads, right? If you're a law firm spending money marketing, you paid for every lead, whether they qualify for you or not. So what we look back at when we contacted the law firm that they had sent 1,000 plus cases to, we realized that over 200 of them were not given the credit as a referral of this law firm, right? So they had to go back, figure out how much money was owed. And I think what happens generally is law firms are so busy being lawyers, right, that they forget about the business side of their business. And listen, I'm an attorney. I've been practicing since 2005. I can attest that I did not learn the business side of this industry in law school. I had to figure it out myself or watch it or read about it or jump into it. And it's not natural for law firms to consider the business side of things. So for me, I saw this white space and I was so intrigued by it because I knew that there was going to be so much value to everybody, to the claimants who want a lawyer and no one's called them back, or to the lawyers that are spending hundreds of thousands, if not millions of dollars and want to maximize the return on that money. So it's been a lot of fun for sure.
There's so much to unpack there. The warm transfer without, the hang up and then sending an email introduction, the intentional attribution to make sure you get the reciprocation to see if they're even closing the leads that you send, where someone else that maybe has a better process could close more.
And by the way, Chris, to that point, I would start to implement with the law firms I'd work with that if the law firm you're sending cases to doesn't give you an update within 24 hours of whether they want that case or not, you need to find another law firm to send that case to. Because how dare us think that we have the luxury, or how dare another law firm think that they have the luxury to sit on a lead that we received and paid for and sent their way to consider and potentially sign and say, we'll get to it after the weekend, or we'll get to it next week. Really? Because that's something I paid for. What if that case has value and we lost it? Because by the time you called up, and how many times does this happen, lawyers? You call up the law firm after a few days. Hey, whatever happened with that case? Yeah, they went somewhere else. What do you mean they went somewhere else? When they called me, they weren't with anybody else. They were
Right.
looking for a lawyer. They were looking for, and I gave it to you, and you waited 4 days or 4 weeks, and we both lost that money. And that's happening right now. It's happening.
Absolutely. And it makes me think of the saying, I think it's a Russell Brunson saying where he says the business that can pay the most for the leads wins. So, even if you have a higher cost per acquisition, if it's still getting placed and you're still monetizing that case, I mean, there's something there. And that has to, that's with good referral relationships.
Oh, for sure. I mean, there are law firms that have turned around where referrals represented 5 or 10% of their revenue, and it changed to 40% of their revenue or higher.
Absolutely. So we've talked a lot about, some of the failures. What are some of the most common failures you see though when firms are handling intakes? Is it just speed? They're not getting to them quick enough? Is that maybe the biggest?
So for web leads, for sure. For web leads, I think law firms need to understand that it's so easy for a claimant to copy and paste a summary onto 5 different law firm websites that most of the time, the winning law firm is not the most successful law firm of the bunch. It's not the most well-known law firm of the bunch. It's actually the first to respond, whether they're a solo shop or a 100-lawyer shop. And I think if we understand that, if we change, see, lawyers, normally their lowest paid employees are the intake specialists, which is crazy when you think about it, because it might be one of, if not the most important responsibility of the law firm. And I think it's a mentality shift that we have to create or make for the law firms, which is understanding that we don't have the time to sit and wait. It is a position that requires being aggressive and persistent, and understanding that prioritizing calling somebody back not only right away, but multiple times over of multiple weeks is necessary to convert that lead into a client. That's an issue. I'll tell you, another issue is probably not giving your intake team decision-making authority, right? Lots of times what happens is an intake specialist or a legal rep or a receptionist, whatever you want to call it in your law firm, will speak with a claimant, will capture a summary of what happened, and then say, okay, we'll share that information with you, or we'll share this information with our legal team, and someone will be in touch with you shortly. We cannot break that chain. We've got to train our intake specialists on what qualifies and what doesn't qualify, and if it qualifies, how do we get it signed? Right? We need to have that process in place. And by the way, if you're not considering electronic signature, that's an issue too, right? At the end of the day, Chris, I like to tell law firms, compare yourself to 2 other law firms. Why, Gary? Because I promise you, if you assume that claimant is reaching out to at least three law firms, you're going to start to think outside the box of what you can do better than 2 other law firms. If you have the mentality that I'm the only game in town and they're calling me because they want me, it's going to hurt you. I promise it's going to hurt you. So I think anytime that you realize that competition exists, and anytime you respect your competitors, that's going to bring the best side out of you. It's going to bring your best competitor out. And I think that's the mentality that we have to drive home with not only our intake specialists, by the way, but with our lawyers. Gary, why the lawyers? There are already cases. Multiple reasons. First one is lots of law firms will give lawyers some intake responsibility. Sometimes you'll give them the closing, right? The signing, ABC, always be closing. That responsibility to the lawyer. If the lawyer has bad bedside manner and is arrogant and has no warm personality, that's going to hurt. It's going to hurt. I remember being at the firm and there were some lawyers I would not give calls to. No way, no how. They would hurt us 100%. Let's go the other way. They become a client and the lawyer isn't respectful or doesn't make them feel like you're prioritizing their case. They'll leave you like that. They'll leave you. I see it all the time. So I think it's a matter of honoring the system, right? Of respecting your competitors and then making sure that everybody's on the same page.
I 1000% agree. And I see that not only in other law firms, but I see that in most businesses, including my own. So I just assume that if I receive an intake looking someone looking for SEO services, they probably contacted three or four because, like you said, you can just copy and paste it. The other thing is everyone's got a phone in arm's reach. So it's very simple to just, dial a couple phone numbers, contact a few firms as opposed to in the past where, it was more about your location and location was everything. Now all the firms are essentially on the same street if you think of, the street being, your cell phone. And
Sure.
so I think that's just an incredible piece of advice there. And didn't have this prepped here, but I kind of wanted to hear your opinion on this is, local service ads, the Google screened are just so prevalent right now. And one of the three ranking factors, it's the three R's. It's reviews, it is region, and responsiveness. In a situation like that, where responsiveness on its own is not only a conversion criteria like what you're talking about, but it also affects your rankings if you're not responding quickly. How would you treat something like that? Would you have your top intake specialists be dedicated to a specific number that those come in? Would you create a channel specific strategy? What's it look like on the local service ad front?
I would say this. I think it's rather than consider who it is of your intake team that's responding, because if they're your intake team, then they obviously have proven to you that they're good enough at speaking with new claimants and at understanding what your firm wants. I think it's more about understanding that this is no longer a 9 to 5 job, right? 20 years ago, if I was at dinner with my wife and I got a claimant called my phone and said I was in a terrible car accident, whatever it is, bad injury, can you help? I might be able to tell that claimant on the phone, you know what, Mrs. Jones, I'm so sorry to hear that. Of course we can help. I'm at dinner with my wife right now. What I'm going to do is on Monday, I'm going to sit down with you. I'm going to get it signed up, and we're going to move this thing along. And I may have been successful. Maybe even 90% of the time, I may have been successful. Right now, you do that, 90% of the time you're out, right? Because it's not just about them speaking with somebody. You talk about responsiveness. It's not 9 to 5. It's nights, it's weekends, it's overnights. You got to have someone picking up your inbound calls. You have to know what outbound hours you're not going to call somebody back at 3:30 in the morning, but you're going to call them back at 7:30. You might. You're going to call them at 9:45 at night. You might, right? You have to consider those things. But it's also, okay, now they qualify. How the path that you give to them to become a client can be very persuasive one way or the other. If you're giving them an intimidating path, Mrs. Jones, do me a favor, go get your police report for me, then come into our office on Monday and we'll sign you up. You just ask Mrs. Jones to do two things that seem really inconvenient. You want to go to the police, you want her to go to the police station, ask for a police report, very overwhelming and intimidating thing to do. And two, you want her to figure out in her schedule, how could you come to your office to meet with a lawyer? Also, maybe it's not a good day for her. It's intimidating. You compare that to Mrs. Jones, what I'm going to do right now is I'm going to stay on the phone with you. And I'm going to text you our retainer. I'm going to stay on the phone, answer any questions you have. What I'd like to do is start representing you the moment you hang up. So let's get this thing signed right now. I'll walk through anything you need me to walk through, and I'll let you know that I got it signed. Now, what did she have to do? No police report, no figuring out how to get to the office. She signed it, and it's one less thing she has to worry about. And I think that's, we have to, what law firms need to do a better job of is understanding the claimant's mentality, Chris. Where we take for granted. So, and by the way, stop me if I go too far here.
No, this is amazing. This is amazing. Continue.
We take for granted that we get so many leads that they'll just keep coming in, they'll just keep coming in, but the reality is, and I've done this little test, I've presented at a conference with like 200 people in the audience. And I said, raise your hand if you ever needed a personal injury lawyer, okay? 5 hands went up, okay? 5 hands out of 200 people. Okay, great. Raise your hand if you ever needed a personal injury lawyer twice in your life. 1 hand went up. What does that mean? It means that most people will never need a personal injury lawyer in their whole entire lives. And if they do, it's likely going to be once. So this is the first time, every time somebody calls you, it's the first time they're needing a personal injury lawyer. If we don't accept that, if we don't provide the appropriate response to that mentality and we just treat them like a number, they'll go on to somebody else. They need someone to make them feel not like a number, but as a friend, as a client, as someone they can trust. And I think we have to appreciate that more. We can't take for granted that we get 50 calls a day, so we're fine if our intake team is only average.
I love all of that. I love just, you want to make it easy for them. You want to make it convenient. When you were talking about this, I was thinking as well, just, I see a lot of law firms, they'll have one office. They'll have an office downtown, let's just say downtown Chicago. Well, if a consumer doesn't want to drive, only a couple miles, maybe, who knows their transportation, who knows where they work, you could consider opening other offices in your same city just because you have your one headquarters, because it's a convenience thing. Some individuals, they aren't bombarded by the TV. They don't have a brand that they recognize and trust. They're just going to look and see who's the closest.
That's right. And oh, by the way, everyone judges books by their covers. I started today, the cover actually put it down into the first page. It didn't grab me. I'm very impatient when it comes to that. But the point is, if I see one law firm that has one address and it's nowhere near me, and then I see another law firm that has 5 addresses, in my mind, I'm giving more credit to the firm that has 5 addresses. It's not because I'm thinking that they're more successful or I'm thinking that they're a better lawyer. It's because I'm thinking that they realize that they need to make it more convenient for people all around them who might value their location. Believe it or not, they might put value on where you're located as whether to hire you or not, right? It's those little things you got to make sure you're checking the boxes off of.
Absolutely. So let's talk about intake conversion experts for a moment here. For me, I have this fear, and I think some probably firms listening have this fear that a third party, would take over and handle that aspect of the business, because it's so important, right? The conversion aspect. How does ICE, intake conversion experts, replace a firm's existing intake department? How does that process work? How do you build the trust with the firm? How does it work like that?
Yeah. So I think first and foremost, we simplified the process. We made it, if you overcomplicate something, you're never going to truly be happy with it, because you're going to keep saying, well, but we're not doing this and we're not doing that. And now let's add this aspect to it. We simplified intake to the following: get somebody's contact information, see if they qualify for representation, get some additional information. If they qualify, get them signed and move it to the law firm to handle the legal work. We don't look at the intake as the legal work. In my book, I wrote a book, The Complete Guide to Law Firm Intake. And in the book, I said, it's better to retain than investigate, than to investigate than retain. Do not use intake as an opportunity to investigate the case, right? Retain it first. If it qualifies, retain it and then investigate the matter. If you start to investigate the case prior to retention, you're going to find holes in it, and you're going to actually overwhelm the claimant, because they're going to think, well, maybe they don't want my case. And maybe I should go to someone who said that they do want my case. So I think we simplified this process. We use the law firm's criteria, and we try to educate the law firm. Hey, is that a qualifying question, or is that an information gathering question? And if it's an information gathering question, do you need it before the case is signed, or is it something you can wait on after the case? For instance, Social Security. Why would a law firm require a claimant to give their Social Security number when you know that people hold that tight to their chest? You know that people are hesitant about sharing their Social Security number. So why require them to give them your Social Security number before signing the case, when the moment they become a client, they're going to give you their credit card number if you want to. They're going to give you everything. They're going to trust you completely implicitly. So we have to understand and appreciate what's investigative and can wait, and what's required. And we did that really well. And for law firms that want a higher volume inventory, but don't have the necessary intake resources internally, there is this outsourced option they can use.
That's incredible. And I want to talk a moment just about your book on intake, and specifically, what is the intake bridge that you refer to?
Yeah. So it's It's making it easy. We talked about it a second ago. If you the bridge from qualification to retention is so important. And if you make it difficult for somebody, they're going to walk away. Let me explain this to you. Claimants don't, lots of times, claimants don't understand whether they have a good case or a bad case. Or I should say, let me say it differently. Whether they have a strong case or a weaker case. They don't know the factors associated with what would dictate whether their case is worth $1 million or $15,000. And the more that you ask of them prior to becoming a client, the more that they're going to second guess this really important decision about whether to sign with a lawyer. So when I talk about the bridge, what I'm saying is, hey, if you know this is a client, whether it's a strong client or a weaker client, once they meet your criteria, you've got to give them the path of the least resistance. You've got to be able, whether it's an electronic retainer, whether it's having an investigator go right to their house, whether it's telling them, hey, we're going to get you a police report, don't worry about that, or we're going to order your medical records, don't worry about that. You've got to make it so simple and easy for them so that they actually say, okay, I could do this. If you make it difficult, you know what they're going to do, Chris? They're going to get this retention packet, they're going to put it on their kitchen table, and then they're going to put something on top of that, and something on top of that, and they're never going to get to it again. You've got to keep it simple, and you've got to keep it in front of them. And because claimants have this mentality of wanting immediate gratification, it's not just claimants, it's all of us, humanity. Right now, we are all in a stage of wanting immediate gratification. I had to order a basketball for my son because he lost it somewhere, right? So I'm not going to go to the local sporting goods store anymore just to get the basketball because that takes an hour out of my day. I'm going on Amazon, and within 3 minutes, I know which basketball I want. I can order it between 2 phone calls, and while I walk downstairs in my house, and that's it. It's the same thing for lawyers. Let's give them immediate gratification. Don't let them wait. Don't tell them we're going to have a lawyer call you back later. Or we're going to think about it over the weekend. That's a really unappealing bridge. When I talk about the bridge, last point on this, Chris, when I talk about the bridge, it's not just the steps on the bridge. It's actually what's on the other side of the bridge, right? So if you're not making what's on the other side very appealing, we can help you. We think we can get you money. We've done this 1,000,000 times. You're going to trust us. If you're not making that really appealing and you keep it scared, well, we don't know if we can help you or not. We have some lawyers who maybe have done this bad. Now, you know what? I need to go over that bridge. I'll go find another bridge, right? Because they have other bridges. Other lawyers are throwing out their bridge and saying, come to us, come to us. That's what I mean.
Yeah, I loved your example with the basketball too, because you have a ton of options right on Amazon, right at your fingertips. There's just options everywhere. And if Amazon doesn't have it, you're going to go to I don't know, Best Buy, but a sporting goods site to find it. You know, I've got one other question that's really common that I wanted to touch on. I kind of want to hear your opinion here. As I see some, top chat programs, maybe they miss empathy and it can lead to a negative review right at the initial onset. And I wanted specifically to ask you, when the person doing the intake knows the case isn't qualified, they know that for whatever reason, the firm's not going to take it. What's the best process to treat that consumer, to try to help them, find a new firm? What's that process look for? Because I'll tell you, as a marketing specialist, many of the 1-star reviews I see isn't even the existing clients. It's the individuals that they didn't take their case. So they call them and said, hey, we aren't going to take your case. And they leave a 1-star review and they're mad about that. So how do you handle those situations where you don't take the case?
Without getting into too much detail, there's a company I'm aware of right now who has a responsibility only to assist with disqualifying leads on behalf of law firms, and they do it warmly. They share the law firm's V card. It's really impressive stuff, and that's for a whole other conversation. But I guess the point is, Chris, you hit on something right now that is being ignored, right? Because it also goes back to referrals. Right? You paid for those leads. And if you can't help them now, let's say you couldn't refer it out either. If you can't help them now, how you treated them when you rejected that case will impact whether they call you again in the future, whether they give you a negative review, whether they promote you to another law firm, whether they share your information, to another claimant, whether they share your information with their friends or family. we have to remember this. We're building a legacy. We're not building a one-time, hey, call us, we can help, great, we can't, no big deal, move on. Like everything we do will have a domino effect. And if we're able to close out cases or reject cases with a little bit of class, that's going to impact whether we're going to have that claimant come back to us in the future, which they may need to, or recommend us to others in the future. So it's really being disregarded completely right now, unfortunately.
Wow. Wow. Yeah. So powerful. I see it so many times, and it's difficult because a lot of times you can't get those reviews taken down. They're telling a factual situation of what occurred, and I'm sure it's frustrating for some of those firms because they say, "Hey, well, it wasn't the case." Well,
Right.
it's maybe it's an empathy thing and how you treated that
It
individual.
is an empathy thing. 100. I think people forget that so many decisions are based upon emotion and customer experience. I have someone I know right now, this minute, is considering between two different types of surgeries. Right, we're talking about surgeries right now, serious things, back, neck
Mhm.
surgery, and he's not sure which path he's going to take. And he told me that, one of the doctors has been calling him uh, early morning or late at night when he has any questions, because the doctor is convinced that there's one surgery he has to undertake or participate in, and that's the right surgery for him. And I'll tell you right now, it was personality driven. The doctor's ability to communicate empathy, like you said, passion for what they're doing, passion for helping, might be the deciding factor in which surgery to take, right? Not the science, because the science,
Wow.
I guess, all things being equal, might be very similar. But it's the fact that one doctor is so passionately advocating this surgery that the personality right there might be the deciding factor. How is that different than anything else we do? I'll tell you a quick story. When I first moved to my current neighborhood with my wife, she had an eye allergy, and we needed to go see an eye doctor. We didn't know any of the local eye doctors, so I did my Google search, and I asked people I knew, and I called multiple eye doctors, and I called one eye doctor where the receptionist picked up, and that's called Dr. Kaplan. I don't remember his or her last name. And I said, my wife has this allergy. I'd love to bring her in. Do you guys, is that something, Dr. Kaplan can assist with? And she said, oh, he's the best. And like I was like, all right, done, you win. The way she said it to me, right? He's the best, was so impactful that it didn't matter if the appointment was a year later or the next day or same day. I was going to that doctor. That receptionist may not have realized it, or maybe was a fantastic salesperson and a practice salesperson. She knew that there was a empathy play here and a personality play here that was going to potentially tug on my heart chords, if you will, and it did, and it worked. I went to that doctor; he was fine. I'm sure most doctors have been fine as well. But the deciding factor for us was the personality of the receptionist and how she bragged and loved about the person she worked for. And if we can get our intake team to do the same thing, that's a win, right? Because again, claimants are not going to choose their lawyers. They might choose to call you because of how much money you resolved for previous claimants. They might choose to call you because your commercials are so effective. But at the end of the day, if they're considering between two law firms, I promise you a deciding factor will be how great that claimant and how personable and how passionate and how interested the person that they're speaking with is in their case.
That's incredible. Such a great piece of advice. That's so amazing, and I completely agree. I see that every day, and that's such a great story.
Yeah.
Gary, as we come to our closing segment here, we have a 3 for 3. It's just a quick fire round, and so starting off, which habit contributes the most to your success?
Um, I would say impatience and persistence.
That's
It's similar things. Yeah, I feel like I'm only on the early stages of Uber success. And I think you have to feel that way. But I honestly, there's this great line I once read or heard somewhere that I remind myself of all the time, which is, don't judge your day by um, how much you harvested. Judge your day by how many seeds you planted, right? So I think it's you got to really throw things out there as much as you can, and stay persistent, and don't accept mediocrity. Be impatient to excel. So that's what drives me.
Love it. Love it. Which entrepreneur, and I'm going to say besides Elon Musk, because we're getting a lot of those, do you admire the most?
So it happens to be a social media guy who is an influencer. It's Gary Vaynerchuk. I don't, I'm a fan of his, but I'm not one of these. I'm not listening to him every single day. But I guess what got me thinking as an entrepreneur is he kind of got in my mind about looking for the white space. And whether it's intake or anything else, I'm constantly looking for opportunities that are either begging for more efficient solutions or being ignored, where there's so much value that you can add. So that's just how my mind works these days. It doesn't have to be intake related. It could be anything related. I'll walk down the street and wonder why are there no advertisements on people's garbage bins? Things like that. They're out 2-3 days a week, and why don't you, if you have your own business, why don't you put it on your garbage bill so everybody drives by, sees the company they should. I'm kind of.
Yeah, so Gary, that's amazing. Are you still there? I think we froze up just a bit.
I'm still here.
There we go. There we go. We'll edit that part out.
Perfect.
Yeah. So what's interesting about that is I feel like you're a DI on the DISC personality assessment because I have so much in common with you. I feel like I'm batting away these shiny objects. We got one more question here. Right. If you had to recommend one business book to a personal injury attorney looking to grow their practice, which would it be?
So it's not just a personal injury attorney. It's really anybody who wants to build their business. One of the first books, it's such an easy read. You read it in an hour. One of the first books I read when I went out on my own was Ask More, Get More. And it really just allowed you, again, similar to what I told you a moment ago, it allowed you to, even from claimants, I'll give you a great example. If you can't sign a claimant, ask them why. Hey, Mrs. Jones, I understand you're not going to be going to our firm. Can I just ask you what happened? You will learn about, well, you know what? Your intake specialist told me that you don't take these types of cases. No, we do take these types of cases. Or another lawyer responded to me faster. Oh, they did. And you'll learn about your own processes that you can fix. And I think if you start to ask, not only asking for more things from people, but if you ask more questions, you're going to get more answers. And it's going to provide more clarity for you as you run your business.
That's a great piece of advice there on its own. I mean, I think we could talk a lot about that. Gary, it's been so awesome having you on the show. Where can people go to learn more?
Yeah, I mean, email me. I have a bunch of email addresses. You can do Gary at getgary.com. It's just the easy one to remember. Reach out to me if you have any questions. I literally love to talk about the law firm intake stuff. There's so much opportunity for growth. And Chris, this was fun, man. I appreciate the back and forth. I think you're doing a heck of a job. So thank you very much for what you're doing in our community. And I'm looking forward to what's to come for both of us.
Absolutely. Thanks so much, Gary.
All right. Take care, guys.